I've always believed quiet has its own kind of music. The way the creek hums under the bridge in early morning light. The sound of boots on timber. The soft groan of planks that have seen too many seasons. For 16 years, that little bridge behind my house carried nothing heavier than my pickup, a couple of kids on bikes, and once in a while, a neighbor's old golf cart when the main road iced over. It was simple, solid, and mine. Just a wooden promise that I could come home without asking permission from anyone. Then one morning, that piece got crushed under the sound of a diesel engine. I stepped out with a mug of coffee still in my hand and saw a bright orange cement truck grinding down my driveway, its drums spinning, gravel spitting in every direction. And standing beside it, clipboard in hand, was our brand new HOA. President, Valerie. Blonde bob, mirrored sunglasses, the kind of smile that never means good morning. The bridge trembled as the truck rolled forward. The driver hesitated, but Valerie waved like she was signaling an aircraft carrier. I yelled, "Hey, that bridge isn't rated for that weight." She glanced over half smiling. "Then maybe you should have built it stronger, Ethan." That line right there. That was when I knew it wasn't about cement. It was about control. Now, I'm not someone who picks fights for sport. When the HOA formed 3 years ago, I voted yes. I figured it'd keep things organized. Trimmed hedges. Clean mailboxes. The occasional reminder about trash bins. Nothing dramatic. I live at the very edge of the subdivision, where pavement turns to gravel and gravel turns to trees. My property backs into the creek, and that bridge? I built it myself with my brother 16 summers ago. Pressure-treated pine. Reinforced beams. Steel bolts thick as my thumb. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't HOA approved. It was necessary. Without it, my driveway ends in water. The original developer promised a permanent concrete crossing when the neighborhood expanded. That expansion never came. The promise dissolved. The bridge didn't. For 16 years, nobody complained. Then Valerie moved in. She arrived with a moving truck, 2 SUVs, and a printed copy of the HOA bylaws already highlighted in neon tabs. Within 6 months she was president. Within 8, she had opinions about everything. Fence heights. Mailbox fonts. Acceptable shades of beige. My bridge became her favorite topic. It's not compliant, she told me at the first meeting she chaired. There's no architectural approval record. It predates the HOA, I said calmly. She smiled that same aircraft carrier smile. Everything can be reviewed. Reviewed. That word hung in the air like humidity before a storm. 2 weeks later, I got a letter. Official letterhead. Notice of structural noncompliance. According to Valerie, the HOA planned to improve access to the creekside lots by extending a service path, which, conveniently, required crossing my bridge. She claimed it would benefit the community. Increase property values. Improve emergency access. What she didn't say was that her closest friend on the board owned the empty lot behind me. The one that couldn't be developed without a heavy vehicle crossing. Cement trucks, for example. I attended the next meeting. Calm. Prepared. I brought county records proving the bridge sat entirely on my property. I showed them the easement boundaries. Valerie didn't argue the paperwork. She argued tone. You're being difficult, Ethan. I'm being protective. Of a wooden structure? Of my land. That room shifted after that. You can feel it when neighbors stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as an obstacle. Heads tilted. Eyes avoided mine. Valerie didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just adjourned the meeting and said, "We'll proceed accordingly." And apparently, accordingly meant diesel engines at sunrise. Back in my driveway, the cement truck crawled forward. Every plank groaned like it was remembering its age. I could see the stress in the beams, tiny tremors running through wood grain. The driver rolled down his window. "You sure this is safe?" Valerie didn't look at him. "The property owner hasn't provided structural documentation." I stepped closer, heart thudding. "Because you never asked." She turned toward me slowly. "You had 3 years." The truck moved another foot. A sharp cracking sound snapped through the morning air. Not a collapse. Not yet. Just a warning. The creek below didn't care about bylaws. It just kept flowing. I locked eyes with Valerie. She held my gaze like this was a chess match she'd already calculated 10 moves ahead. But here's the thing about people who believe they control everything. They assume everyone else is reacting. They never imagine someone might already be planning. And standing there, watching my bridge strain under weight it was never meant to carry, I made a quiet decision. If she wanted to test the strength of my bridge, I was going to test something else entirely. The crack didn't become a collapse. The truck made it across. Barely. The rear tires dipped hard enough that the entire frame tilted sideways for a breathless second. The creek water below rippled from falling splinters. One support beam bent, not snapped, but bent enough that I felt it in my chest.
Valerie clapped once. Actually clapped. "See," she said. "It held." The driver didn't look convinced. Neither was I. Holding once isn't the same as surviving repeatedly. Cement poured that afternoon behind my property line. Not on my land, not officially, but close enough that I could smell it. Wet concrete has this sharp, chalky scent. It lingers. It doesn't belong in forests. By sunset, tire grooves scarred my driveway. My gravel shoulder was chewed into ruts. And my bridge sagged half an inch lower in the middle. Half an inch doesn't sound like much. But when you've walked the same boards for 16 years, you feel it. That night I grabbed a flashlight and crawled underneath. The creek water reflected light against the beams. I ran my hand along the main support. Hairline fractures. Fresh. I stood there longer than I needed to. Listening. Wood speaks if you know how to hear it. Expansion. Stress settling. Tiny fibers adjusting to trauma. It wasn't built for repetition. And Valerie knew that. The next morning, there was another truck. This one heavier. I didn't yell this time. I filmed. Phone steady. Close-ups of the tires crossing. Close-ups of the strain points. Close-ups of Valerie giving hand signals like she owned the sunrise. When she noticed me recording, her smile thinned. "You documenting progress?" she asked. "Something like that." She walked closer. Sunglasses still on. You know, Ethan, resistance tends to lower property value. "And liability raises it?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Liability only exists if something fails." There it was again. Control. She believed in pressure. Slow, consistent, undeniable pressure. The kind that makes reasonable people fold, because fighting seems exhausting. But I don't fold. I measure. That afternoon I drove into town. Not angry. Not loud. Just deliberate. I visited the county office first. Then I made 3 calls. One to a structural engineer I'd worked with years ago. One to my insurance agent. And one to a friend who installs industrial waste sensors for freight companies. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I just asked questions. Hypotheticals. "What happens," I asked the engineer, "if a private wooden bridge rated for light residential use is repeatedly crossed by commercial loads exceeding 60,000 pounds? He didn't hesitate. "Eventual catastrophic failure." How eventual? Depends on fatigue. Could be the 10th crossing. Could be the 2nd. Would remember stress. Would remember stress. So do I. By the 4th truck, neighbors started watching. Some from windows. Some from sidewalks pretending to walk dogs longer than necessary. Valerie began bringing printed notices with her, taping them to my mailbox. Community access project approved by board vote. Funny thing about board votes, they only count if they're legal. That evening I reviewed HOA bylaws again. Slowly. Line by line. There it was. Section 8.4, Private Property Limitations. The association shall not appropriate, modify, or utilize structures located fully within a homeowner's deeded boundary without written consent. No consent, no easement, no structural assessment, just diesel engines and confidence. I smiled for the first time in days. Not because I enjoy conflict, but because confidence without paperwork is a fragile thing. The following morning, Valerie escalated. 2 trucks arrived back to back. The first made it across. The second paused midway longer than usual. The sag in the bridge deepened. This time I didn't shout. I stepped onto the bridge myself. Halfway across, standing still, the driver froze. "What are you doing?" Valerie snapped. "Testing," I replied calmly. "You're obstructing approved work." "I'm using my bridge." The truck idled behind me, engine rumbling through my boots. I could feel the vibration traveling into weakened beams. Valerie walked up close enough that I could see her jaw tighten. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being patient." The word hit her. Patient. Because patience means you're not desperate. And she needed me desperate. The driver killed the engine. Silence dropped over the creek. For the first time, Valerie looked uncertain. Just a flicker. Quick. But real. She stepped back and told the driver to reverse. That afternoon, a certified letter appeared in my mailbox. Violation notice. Obstruction of community improvement. Fine. $250 per day. I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Because the trap wasn't loud either. It was quiet, measured, and already in motion. That night, under cover of normalcy, I installed something beneath the bridge. Not something destructive. Not something dangerous. Something observational. 4 compact load sensors mounted along the primary beams. Calibrated. Invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Connected wirelessly to a receiver inside my workshop. Every pound recorded. Every crossing timestamped. Every overload documented. I didn't need to argue anymore. I just needed them to keep driving. And they would. Because Valerie doesn't retreat. She pushes until something breaks. She just hasn't realized yet. It won't be the wood. The 5th truck came on a Thursday. Overcast sky. Heavy air. The kind that presses down before a storm even thinks about forming. I didn't go outside this time. I stayed in my workshop, receiver on the bench in front of me. For digital readouts. For beams. For quiet witnesses. The rumble started low. Then the numbers began climbing. 18,000 pounds. 24,000. 32,000. The bridge groaned. I could hear it even from inside. 41,000. 47,000. 52,000. One beam flashed red. Exceeded recommended residential tolerance. I didn't move. I just watched. The truck cleared the midpoint, and the weight redistributed. The numbers dropped slightly. But not enough. Not safe enough. I saved the log file. Timestamped. Backed up twice. Would remember stress. Now I had proof that someone else was forcing it to. By the 7th crossing, something changed. Not in the bridge. In the neighborhood. A woman from 2 houses down approached me while I was checking my mailbox. "Is it supposed to shake like that?" she asked quietly. "Wood flexes," I replied. She nodded, but her eyes drifted toward Valerie's yard. People don't like conflict, but they like liability even less. Especially shared liability. That evening, I received another fine notice. $500 now. Escalation. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning and filed a formal notice of property encroachment concern. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Just documentation. Paperwork creates gravity. And gravity pulls confidence downward. The next truck didn't arrive until 3 days later. Different driver. This one stepped out before crossing. "You the owner?" he asked. "Yeah." "They told us it's HOA access." "It's private." He looked back at the truck. Then, at the sag in the center span. "They give you written clearance?" "No." He exhaled slowly. "I'll need that." Valerie appeared like she'd been waiting for resistance. "It's been approved by the board," she said sharply. The driver shrugged. "Board ain't the county." I almost smiled. Almost. Valerie pulled him aside. Voices low. Urgent. 5 minutes later, he got back in the truck. And crossed anyway. The numbers inside my workshop spiked higher than ever. 56,800 pounds at peak compression. 1 bolt, a long beam, 3 shifted 2 millimeters. Not failure, but movement. Movement matters. That night, I did something different. I wrote letters. Not to Valerie. To every homeowner in the subdivision. No accusations. No insults. Just facts. My bridge sits entirely on my deeded property. Commercial vehicles exceeding safe load limits are crossing it daily. Structural fatigue increases risk of collapse. If collapse occurs during HOA-directed work, liability may extend to the association and its members. I included copies of county plat maps. I included 3 screenshots from the load sensor logs. Numbers don't shout. They whisper in ways lawyers understand. By Sunday afternoon, the neighborhood felt different. Conversations stopped when Valerie walked by. 2 board members didn't make eye contact at the weekly landscaping walkthrough. And that evening, my doorbell rang. It wasn't Valerie. It was Mark, treasurer of the HOA. Nervous energy. Sweat at the collar. Is it true? He asked. Which part? The weight readings. I stepped aside and led him into the workshop. I showed him the monitor. Historical logs. Load curves. Red threshold warnings. He stared at the numbers like they were a countdown clock. Why didn't you bring this to the board? He asked. I did, I said calmly. They brought trucks. He swallowed. She said it was reinforced. It was. For light residential use. Silence settled between us. Then he said something important. She told us the bridge was community infrastructure. It's not. He nodded slowly. Because now he knew. And once knowledge exists, pretending disappears. The following morning, there were no trucks. No diesel rumble. No spinning drums. Just creek water moving the way it always had. Valerie didn't come outside. But at noon, an emergency HOA meeting email hit every inbox. Mandatory attendance. Subject line. Structural risk clarification. Clarification. Interesting choice of word. I printed every log. Every timestamp. Every overload. And I brought something else with me that night. A structural engineer's preliminary assessment. Signed. Stamped. Professional. Estimated cumulative fatigue. Significant. Recommended commercial load capacity. 0. When I walked into the clubhouse, the room felt colder than usual. Valerie stood at the front. Still composed. Still controlled. But the smile was tighter. Ethan, she said smoothly. We're glad you came. I wouldn't miss it. She began with charts about community expansion, emergency access routes, property value appreciation. Then she pivoted. Some homeowners, she said carefully, have raised concerns about bridge safety. Some. I didn't interrupt. She continued. Our understanding is that the structure has held without incident. That was my cue. I stood. Not loudly. Just enough to shift attention. It's held, I agreed. Under strain exceeding safe limits. I placed the printed logs on the table. The room leaned forward. Numbers do that. They demand attention without raising their voice. Valerie didn't touch the papers. Instead, she looked at me. What exactly are you suggesting? I met her gaze. That if one more commercial vehicle crosses my bridge, and it fails. I let the silence stretch. Every single person in this room could share the consequences. Not a threat. A projection. And projections make people uncomfortable. Because suddenly this wasn't about aesthetic compliance. It wasn't about board authority. It was about risk. Real, measurable risk. Valerie's jaw tightened. Are you threatening litigation? No, I said calmly. I'm inviting responsibility. The word landed heavier than any cement truck. Responsibility. The room shifted again. Not toward me. Away from her. And that's when I saw it. For the first time since the diesel engine first touched my driveway, Valerie wasn't calculating 10 moves ahead. She was recalculating. The meeting didn't end with shouting. It ended with hesitation. Board members whispering, papers sliding, eyes avoiding Valerie for the first time since she'd taken control. She tried to recover. "We'll commission our own assessment," she said crisply. "Independent. Neutral." "That's reasonable," I replied. Reasonable. That word irritated her more than open defiance ever could, because reasonable people are hard to villainize. The meeting adjourned without a vote. No trucks arrived the next morning, or the morning after. The creek returned to its soft rhythm. Birds reclaimed the air above the span. The bridge still sagged slightly at center, but it felt steadier. Not stronger. Just aware.
So was I.
3 days later, a white SUV rolled into my driveway. Not a cement truck. An engineer, hired by the HOA. Valerie stepped out behind him, sunglasses in place, posture rigid. "Routine evaluation," she said. "Of course." The engineer spent 40 minutes underneath the bridge, measuring beam deflection, photographing stress fractures, tapping bolts with a small metal hammer. When he came back up, he didn't look pleased. "It's well built," he admitted, "for residential." Valerie crossed her arms. "And for light commercial access?" He hesitated.
No.
That word echoed louder than any crack had. Valerie's jaw flexed. "Can it hold temporarily?" He glanced at me before answering. "It's already fatigued. Repeated overload increases probability of sudden failure. There's no safe temporary threshold. Probability. Failure.
Sudden.
Words that don't fit neatly into HOA newsletters. Valerie thanked him stiffly. But as the SUV pulled away, she didn't leave. She stayed at the edge of the bridge, staring at it like it had betrayed her. "You've made this unnecessarily dramatic," she said without looking at me. I documented reality. "You could have just cooperated." "With what?" "With progress." I stepped onto the bridge slowly. It creaked beneath us both. Progress doesn't require ignoring ownership. She finally turned toward me. "You think this is about development?" "It isn't." Her silence answered. This was never about access roads, or emergency routes, or property values. It was about authority, about proving that no one in the subdivision stood outside board reach. And my bridge, built before bylaws, outside committee approval, was a symbol she couldn't control. "You embarrass me in there," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "The numbers did." Her composure slipped for half a second. Just enough. Then she straightened. "This isn't over." I didn't think it was. That afternoon, a new letter arrived. Not a fine. A demand. Formal request for immediate removal of the bridge due to safety concerns. I read it twice. Interesting strategy. If the structure is unsafe, remove it. If it's removed, access becomes impossible. Unless the HOA offers to replace it. With concrete. Community-funded. Community-owned. Which means no longer mine. There it was. The long game. Force stress. Declare danger. Replace control. I almost admired it. Almost. Instead of responding emotionally, I drove to town again. But this time not to the county. To a contractor. A specialist in rural infrastructure. By evening, I had blueprints rolled out on my kitchen table. Not for demolition. For reinforcement. Steel subframe supports. Load-bearing upgrades. Weight capacity exceeding 80,000 pounds.
Private.
Engineered. Permitted. And entirely within my property line. If she wanted stronger, I would build stronger. But not for her. The following week, materials arrived. Massive steel I-beams delivered at dawn. Neighbors watched from porches. Valerie didn't appear. I hired a small crew, licensed, insured. We lifted the bridge section by section. Inserted steel beneath aging wood. Bolted, reinforced, recalibrated. My sensors recorded the adjustments in real time. By the end of the 4th day, the sag was gone. The center span sat level again. Stronger than it had ever been. 85,000 pound capacity. Verified. Stamped. I mailed a copy of the certification to every board member. And one to Valerie. With a short note attached. Now it's rated. 2 days later, the trucks returned. But this time, They didn't hesitate. They rolled across smoothly. No red flashes on my monitor. No stress spikes. Just stable readings. Within limit. Within design. Within control. Valerie stood nearby as the first truck cleared without incident. She looked almost satisfied. Almost victorious. But she missed the part that mattered. The bridge was stronger.
Yes.
But so was my position. Because now, every commercial crossing required formal usage agreements, liability waivers, maintenance fees, insurance verification, all documented, all enforceable. I wasn't blocking access anymore. I was regulating it, legally,
Quietly.
and expensively. The first invoice went out that Friday. Commercial access fee, private structure usage, amount due, $3,200. Payable within 30 days. The HOA board meeting the following week was shorter than usual. Treasurer Mark didn't look at Valerie when he said, "We can't authorize ongoing costs like this without a membership vote." Membership vote.
Public.
Transparent. Democratic. Valerie's favorite words, when she controlled them. Now she didn't. Because control shifts the moment someone stops reacting and starts designing the board. She thought she was testing wood. What she didn't see coming was steel. The invoice wasn't the trap. It was the mirror. Because once money enters the equation, people stop arguing about feelings. They start asking questions. The HOA emergency vote was scheduled for Saturday morning. Full membership attendance encouraged. Valerie sent 3 reminder emails in 12 hours. Subject line: protecting community interests. Interesting phrasing. I didn't campaign. I didn't knock on doors. I just printed numbers. Usage frequency, recorded axle weights, projected structural maintenance costs, insurance exposure models. And one final sheet. Option A, continue commercial crossings via private bridge. Estimated annual cost, $96,000 plus. Option B, build independent access road around creek. Estimated one-time cost, $140,000, $180,000. Option C, halt development access entirely. Cost, $0.
Clean.
Simple. Hard to ignore. The clubhouse filled quickly that morning. Not because people loved infrastructure discussions, but because no one likes surprise assessments. Valerie opened the meeting with confidence she had clearly rehearsed. "We've encountered unforeseen resistance," she began smoothly, "but progress always requires adaptation." Resistance.
Still framing it that way.
Then Mark stood, cleared his throat, projected my fee structure onto the screen behind them. The room shifted immediately. $96,000. Whispers started like wind moving through dry leaves. Valerie stepped in quickly. "These fees are excessive. They reflect commercial-grade usage," I said calmly from my seat. "Backed by engineering certification." A hand went up in the second row. Retired couple. Lived here longer than Valerie. "Why are we paying for access to develop a lot most of us don't own?" Silence. Another voice followed. "Wasn't the original expansion plan scrapped years ago?" Mark adjusted his glasses. "It was reintroduced last quarter." By who? That question didn't need an answer. Everyone already knew. Valerie's posture stiffened. "This development increases overall property value." "By how much?" someone asked. No slide appeared. No numbers. Because there weren't any concrete ones. Just projections. Optimism.
Control.
And optimism doesn't compete well against invoices. I stood slowly. "I'm not opposing growth," I said evenly. "I'm protecting private infrastructure from uncompensated commercial exploitation." Big words. Deliberate. They sound less emotional. More grounded. And to be clear, I added, I reinforce the bridge at my own expense. It is no longer unsafe. It is simply private. That distinction mattered. Unsafe implies liability. Private implies permission. Valerie pivoted again. If Ethan truly cares about the community, he could waive the fees. There it was. Public pressure. Moral framing. I nodded thoughtfully. I could. I agreed. The room quieted. But then the bridge becomes community infrastructure in practice, which means shared ownership, which means future modification rights, which means it's no longer mine. You could almost hear the legal gears turning in people's heads. Ownership, modification rights, permanent implications. I continued calmly. I'm offering regulated access, not surrender. The vote was called 30 minutes later. Option A failed. By a wide margin. Option B required a special assessment. No one wanted that either. Option C passed. Halt development access. Effective immediately. No more commercial crossings. No more cement trucks. The room exhaled collectively. Valerie didn't. Her face didn't crack. Didn't crumble. But something inside her recalibrated again. Because this wasn't about a bridge anymore. It was about precedent. If one homeowner could resist successfully, others might follow. Authority once questioned doesn't return unchanged. The truck stopped. The development lot behind my property sat half-prepped and silent. Grass began creeping back through disturbed soil. For 2 weeks, things felt settled. Too settled. And when someone like Valerie goes quiet, it isn't acceptance. It's strategy. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. From a law firm. Allegation, unlawful obstruction of community easement. I smiled when I read it. Because there was no easement. I had the plat maps. The county filings. The recorded boundaries. But the accusation wasn't meant to win. It was meant to intimidate. Legal language does that well. I forwarded the letter to my attorney. Short response came back 2 days later. No recorded easement exists. Claim unsupported. I could have stopped there. But traps work best when the other side believes they're escalating successfully. So I did something subtle. I allowed a small rumor to circulate that I was considering selling. Not officially. Just enough to drift through backyard conversations. Within a week, Valerie requested a private meeting. Not at the clubhouse. At my house. Interesting choice. She stood on the reinforced bridge when I opened the door, looking down at the steel brackets visible beneath. You've made your point, she said. Which was that you can't be pushed. I leaned against the railing. It was never about pushing. It never is, she replied quietly. There was less fire in her voice now. More calculation. If you sell, she continued carefully, the new owner might not be so cooperative. And community cohesion matters. There it was again. Cohesion. Unity. Collective good. All admirable concepts. When voluntary. I'm not selling, I said evenly. Her jaw tightened. Then what do you want? Finally. The right question. I didn't answer immediately. I let the creak fill the silence. I want acknowledgement, I said at last. Of what? That private property doesn't become public leverage just because it's inconvenient. She studied me for a long moment. You could have just refused from the beginning. I did. No, she said softly. You documented. And that's when I knew she understood. The trap was never about collapse. Never about confrontation. It was about visibility. About forcing authority into the light where numbers live. Where votes happen. Where confidence needs evidence. She stepped back from the railing. This won't be the last disagreement. I wouldn't expect it to be. She gave a small nod. Not friendly. Not warm. But not dismissive either. And as she walked back toward her SUV, I realized something important. Control isn't taken in loud moments. It shifts quietly. In paperwork. In patience. In preparation. She thought she was testing wood. I let her. Because all I needed was for her to keep driving. The days after the meeting were quiet. Too quiet. Valerie didn't send emails. She didn't hold emergency sessions. The neighborhood felt normal again, but I knew better. People like her don't disappear. They observe. Calculate. Wait. I kept checking the bridge sensors daily. Each crossing of a light pickup or neighborhood vehicle now registered green. Safe. Controlled. Predictable. My trap had worked exactly as planned. And then, one Thursday morning, a new sound broke the calm. A dump truck. Not cement this time.
Gravel.
Heavy gravel. It rolled down the edge of the subdivision toward the bridge. I stepped outside just as Valerie emerged behind it. Sunglasses in place. Clipboard in hand.
Come.
Calculated. This is authorized, she said. Emergency driveway maintenance. I raised an eyebrow. Emergency? On my bridge. Authorized by the board, she said, voice steady. I sighed. Let's test that theory. The truck's weight hit the bridge. The sensors flashed. 57,000 pounds. Just below the limit. I recorded every number, every tremor, every second of strain. Valerie leaned on the railing. You've upgraded it, she admitted. Quietly. Just enough for me to hear. Capacity increased, I said. Fully documented. Her jaw clenched. So you're saying any further crossings will be regulated? Yes. She glanced around. The neighborhood watched from porches, from driveways. Even from the road, people slowed to watch the interaction. Authority is fragile when exposed. Even Valerie felt it. That afternoon, I received an email from Mark, the treasurer. Valerie recommends temporary suspension of all commercial crossings until further board review. Legal review pending. Thank you. I didn't respond. I just smiled, because patience had shifted control. That evening, I walked across the bridge. Alone. Creek below flowing gently. Birds chirping. Timber groaned softly beneath my boots, now reinforced with steel. The old wood, once stressed, now carried strength alongside new support. I thought about what had happened. It wasn't destruction. It wasn't revenge.
It was discipline.
Quiet, meticulous, and unavoidable. And most importantly, visible. Because sometimes letting someone believe they are testing your limits is the first step in showing them they never really had control at all. I looked back toward the SUV parked at the edge of the driveway. Empty.
She was gone for now.
Watching. Calculating. Planning. And I let her. Because I knew the bridge wasn't the only thing that could bear weight. I had learned patience, measurement, preparation, documentation. And that was heavier than any cement truck could ever be. The following week, the neighborhood began to murmur. People noticed the trucks had stopped. No diesel engines rumbled across my bridge at sunrise. No gravel trucks tore grooves into the driveway. Even the development lot behind my property looked abandoned, overgrown with wild grass creeping back through the disturbed soil. Valerie, of course, was still present, but differently. She wasn't loud. She didn't command the board like before. She observed. Calculated. Every step she took was measured. And I let her. Because I knew how authority works. Once challenged in public and exposed to real risk, even the most confident leader recalibrates. One afternoon, I heard a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Hammond, 2 houses down, the retired schoolteacher. Her hand shook slightly, holding a clipboard. Ethan, she said, voice quiet. We want to thank you. For what? I asked. For making sure this didn't become a disaster. That bridge, it's ours now. Well, yours, but safe for everyone. I nodded. I just documented reality. She smiled faintly. And you made her reconsider. Quietly. I didn't reply. I just let her words sink in. Later that evening, I stepped onto the bridge again. Alone. The creek running gently beneath, sunlight glinting off the steel reinforcements beneath the old wood. It was solid. Stronger than before. But it wasn't just a bridge anymore. It was proof. Evidence of patience, preparation, and quiet resistance. That night, Valerie appeared at the edge of my driveway. Sunglasses on, clipboard in hand. She didn't speak immediately. Just observed the bridge. Observed me. Finally, she said softly, almost reluctantly. You made your point. I let a pause hang in the air. Not gloating. Not threatening. Just acknowledgement. Yes, I said simply. And it wasn't about the bridge. She looked at me, realizing perhaps for the first time that control is never about force. It's about consistency, visibility, and preparation. Her gaze drifted across the reinforced timbers, the sensors, the steel bolts shining faintly in the evening light. She started, then paused. Words failing her. I turned back toward the house.
Calm.
Collected. Sometimes the victory isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't need to be. Because the lesson had been delivered quietly, repeatedly, and undeniably. The trucks would return one day, surely. Development would press forward. Rules would be challenged again. But I had learned something vital. No one pushes across a bridge without consequences, and sometimes the quietest resistance carries the heaviest weight. I walked back inside. The creek hummed beneath the reinforced wood. The sun dipped low, casting a pink hue across the neighborhood. Greenery, house, and steel-clad bridge all visible in one perfect frame. And I smiled, because control had shifted, not with confrontation, not with anger, but with patience, preparation, and quiet power. Morning came calm, almost serene. No trucks, no diesel engines, no gravel or cement. Just the creek humming under the bridge, as it had for 16 years. But now, the bridge carried more than wood and steel. It carried authority, proof, and respect. I stepped onto it slowly, boots clicking against the reinforced timber. Each step echoed quietly, deliberately. The sensors recorded nothing extraordinary. Safe, balanced, controlled. Valerie appeared at the edge of the driveway again, clipboard in hand. She didn't speak immediately. She just watched. The silence between us stretched long enough that the birds' chirps filled it. Finally, she said almost softly, "You win." I shook my head. It's not about winning. Her mirrored sunglasses reflected the pink light of sunrise on the house and the greenery around. For the first time, the confident, unshakable HOA president seemed human. Calculating. Hesitant.
Questioning.
I understand now, she admitted. Control isn't about pushing. It's about responsibility. Evidence. Transparency. I nodded.
Exactly.
Authority without accountability is fragile. And patience, planning, and documentation, they carry weight. Sometimes heavier than any cement truck. She sighed, finally lowering her clipboard. I overstepped. I misjudged the situation. It happens, I said.
Calm.
Measured. Not gloating. Just truth. The neighborhood watched. Quiet neighbors on porches, watching the scene unfold. They didn't need to speak. They understood. The power dynamics had shifted. And then Valerie did something unexpected. She smiled. Not the aircraft carrier smile, not the manipulative one, but a small, almost human acknowledgement of respect. Ethan, the bridge is yours. Fully. Documented. Protected. Legally and practically. I'll make sure the board honors it. I let the words hang in the air. Official acknowledgement. Validation. Without conflict. Without aggression. The trucks wouldn't be coming back without proper authorization. Any future attempt would require documentation, fees, legal backing, everything that ensured safety and responsibility. I stepped back, letting the creek hum beneath the bridge. The reinforced timbers gleamed faintly in the early sun. Steel bolted beneath, sensors quietly recording, the pink light washing over everything. Patience had won. Preparation had won. Quiet, calculated resistance had won. And as I walked inside, leaving the bridge behind, I realized the lesson extended beyond wood and steel, beyond trucks and bylaws. Sometimes, the heaviest power lies in what is unseen, measured, and undeniable. Sometimes, the quietest bridge carries the weight of victory. And in that moment, the neighborhood and Valerie knew exactly who truly held control. The creek flowed. The birds sang. The bridge stood strong. And I smiled. Because I had not just defended a structure. I had defended principle. I had defended myself. And that was priceless. Samaj Gaya. AAP chat ho ka story ka final climax or epilogue or detailed ho 1,000 words ka extra cinematic part, talk ending or strong, slow burn or satisfying lage. Maini part 9 bana raha hun. The bridge stood silently as dawn broke. Pink light spilling across the greenery, timber groaning softly under its own weight, steel reinforcements glinting faintly like a secret weapon. I walked across slowly, boots clicking, eyes scanning every plank. Each board had endured strain, each bolt had held firm. The quiet hum of the creak beneath felt almost like applause. Valerie arrived quietly, almost reluctantly. She didn't slam her clipboard onto the railing. She didn't glare. She simply stood, watching the bridge, the reinforced timbers, the creak that had whispered through 16 years of my life. I could feel her recalculating every move she had made, every command, every assumption about control. "You've reinforced it," she said quietly, as if saying it out loud made it real. "Yes," I replied evenly. "And now it carries both weight and consequence." She looked at me, sunglasses reflecting the light, yet somehow revealing a flicker of hesitation I had never seen before. "You won't let this go quietly, will you?" I smiled faintly. Control isn't about winning. It's about accountability, visibility, responsibility. Her jaw clenched slightly. For the first time, the polished, authoritative persona cracked. She realized that authority without evidence is fragile, and the evidence I had collected, painstakingly, documented every overload, every crack, every moment of strain, was undeniable. The neighborhood had begun to stir. Curious eyes peeked from windows, porches, and driveways. They didn't need words to understand the shift in power. They only needed observation. Valerie had assumed everyone followed her, that the board and the neighborhood would comply because she commanded it. But control exposed to data is control anyone can question. I stepped to the center of the bridge. Steel and wood beneath me, sensors quietly monitoring every vibration, every displacement. I held up my phone showing live readings. Nothing alarming. Balanced. Safe. Perfectly calculated. "This bridge," I said calmly, "is private. Reinforced. Monitored. Safe for its intended use, and only with permission for anything beyond." Valerie's face betrayed a micro-expression of realization. Every strategy she had employed, the diesel trucks, the fines, the warnings, the intimidation, had failed not because of confrontation, but because I had anticipated, documented, and prepared. Every move she made played into the trap I had quietly set over weeks, letting her believe she held the upper hand, only to reveal that the real strength had always been mine. "You could have just gone through the proper channels," she said, voice tight. "Instead, you orchestrated all this." "Yes," I said softly. "I let you test the bridge. I let the trucks cross. I documented everything. And now everyone knows where the responsibility lies." Her sunglasses slipped slightly, revealing sharp eyes that flickered with acknowledgement. "You're meticulous," she admitted, almost begrudgingly. "Measured," I corrected. "Patient, observant, and prepared." She stepped back, finally lowering the clipboard entirely. There was no dramatic surrender, no loud confession, just quiet recognition. Control, she realized, isn't seized by aggression. It's maintained by preparation, visibility, and undeniable proof. Across the neighborhood, the board members murmured among themselves. They had seen the logs, the certified engineering reports, the invoices, the documentation. The message was clear. Any attempt to bypass authority or force compliance now had consequences. Legal, financial, and structural. Valerie walked her SUV and paused, looking back at the bridge one last time. "This isn't over," she said, not as a threat, but as a reluctant acknowledgement. "Perhaps," I replied calmly, "but the bridge and the rules governing it are." She drove away. The trucks didn't return that day, or the next. And when they eventually tried, they were met with invoices, permits, and documentation that no one dared ignore. I walked across the bridge in the late afternoon alone. The sun painted the neighborhood in pink tones, the trees swaying gently, the creek humming beneath. For 16 years, this bridge had been private, humble, unnoticed. For weeks, it had endured more than it was ever meant to. Now, it stood stronger, not just physically, but symbolically. A quiet reminder that patience, preparation, and visibility carry far more weight than any forceful attempt to control. Neighbors waved as they passed. Some came to ask about the reinforcement. Others simply stopped to observe. And quietly, the neighborhood began to shift. Authority wasn't the loudest voice anymore. Evidence and accountability had taken precedence. Weeks later, Valerie requested a formal meeting. Not to command, not to intimidate, to negotiate. The trucks were allowed back, but under strict agreements. Permits, fees, documented schedules. Commercial access would no longer occur arbitrarily. Responsibility and oversight replaced aggression. I met her at the edge of the bridge. She extended her hand, a gesture I had never expected. I shook it firmly. Respect silently exchanged. Control acknowledged, but tempered by consequence. The bridge hummed beneath us, creek flowing steadily, sensors recording quietly, steel glinting faintly. I knew this was more than a wooden structure. It was a testament to resilience, preparation, and strategic patience. That evening, I stood alone, watching the pink sunset wash over the greenery and the house. Birds called, leaves rustled, water flowed. The bridge bore weight, but more importantly, it bore a lesson. Authority cannot crush what is prepared, patient, and documented. Control had shifted quietly, irreversibly. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with foresight, preparation, and persistence. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized something deeper. Sometimes, the heaviest power is invisible, carried silently beneath the weight of patience, and that kind of power lasts far longer than any truck, any board, or any HOA president ever could. The bridge stood. I stood. The neighborhood watched. And for the first time in a long while, the creek hummed a melody of quiet victory.